I'm Julie Steele with O'Reilly Media, and I'm here with Ari Gesher of Palantir, who is the engineering ambassador, right?
That's correct.
Tell me what an engineering ambassador does.
Well, it's kind of a funny title. It's kind of fun. I got to come up with it myself. I've been with Palantir for over 8 years. So I was kind of employee number 9, one of the really early engineers. And as the company's grown, we're about 1,500 people now, which is an interesting ride unto itself. But as the company's grown, there's just a lot of value in having someone who really deeply understands the technology and understands the tech community. And so most of my work these days is spent kind of going out and talking to the rest of the world at large. There's a degree to which my job is similar to what you might think of as like a developer evangelist, but because of the way that we sell our platform, the way we engage with our customers, we're not really trying to convince people to suddenly use it in the way that a developer evangelist would be. So I opted for ambassador because it's much more about sort of keeping up relationships rather than selling something in particular, right?
I like that.
Yeah.
So, and if you were to sell something in particular, it's big data systems, right? And integrated.
Yeah, I mean, we sell. A good way to think about what we do is, we're a software company. We sell software to people that have data for them to be able to put together all of their data about a specific problem in a form that's easily accessible to the subject matter experts. So, and it's been interesting to look at the programming like here at Strata, because there's a lot of talk about stuff that, from our perspective, we've been working on for a lot of years about going that last mile and making data available to people who know the most about the problem out in the real world that the data represents, but don't have access to the technical toolkit that a data scientist would. They don't know how to write code, don't know how to write queries, that kind of thing. And so we've spent a lot of time, a lot of resources. If you think about what we do from an engineering perspective, our engineering teams are split 50-50 between doing the integration work of the kind of big data processing infrastructure, and the other 50% is all spent on user interface, right? It's going that last mile to say, okay, how do we transform this data into a form and bring a tool set that's usable by mere mortals in this space, and it works really well for a lot of different problems. And specifically, one of our niches, there's actually a lot of different places where this is at play, and what I was talking about at Strata this year was the kinds of problems that you can solve with data only when you have a human in the loop. Right. So where automated analysis isn't going to work. And there's a whole class of problems around adaptive adversaries. So when you're dealing with cybersecurity, you're dealing with fraud, counterterrorism, like all these things where there's people on the other side who are actively trying to evade detection and will change their tactics and their behavior as soon as you detect them. The algorithmic approach breaks down very fast, right? Machine learning always has to use the past to predict about the future, and if the future is not related to the past anymore, it doesn't work.
That's really interesting. So I'm curious, when Strata started a few years ago, it was sort of in this environment of people just starting to use the term big data and understand that it was something that could help their bottom line, maybe, but they didn't really know how to apply it, and they kind of had this idea they had to hire a data scientist and maybe get this thing called Hadoop, but we've now seen the ecosystem grow quite a bit. I'm curious, what are the resistance points you're now encountering, or the challenges that you're encountering in your ambassadorial work? What are the communication challenges?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think someone put up a slide in one of the talks I saw that showed where big data is in the Gartner hype cycle, and I thought it really nailed it, which is that we're at about the peak of the hype cycle. And so one of the things that I've been talking about and really clear on is that the promise of big data is very real, but the implementation is a lot harder than people think it is. And so someone else summed this up nicely, is like, my customers keep saying, well, I'd like to buy a Hadoop, where do I get one, right? And it's like, okay, so people understand that they need to do this thing and it has incredible promise, they just really don't know how to proceed. And I think you see a lot of organizations that want to have a data strategy, they know it's important, but they don't even know how to begin approaching it. They say, we need to do something with data, because I hear that's a big thing to do. And the promise is there. Like, we see these big data-driven organizations, when Facebook's presentations here are always, astounding.
Yeah.
And so that what you can do, that promise is real, but how you apply that in sort of an older business or one that hasn't been able to attract the kind of technical talent, doesn't generate, the other thing is that don't generate their own data, right? The big data-driven organizations, they built the machines that generate the data, and so they know what they're dealing with, as opposed to dealing with a smattering of legacy systems that they have to figure out how to integrate and put together. So I think there's a lot of people, a lot of companies trying to figure out what it means to actually use this stuff. Yeah. And what we've seen in our own practice is the place where we've been most successful and and we can deliver the most results is when people have a real, they know the problem that they want to solve.
Yeah.
When people are just kind of looking amorphously for a strategy, it doesn't really go anywhere, but they say, look, we have this one problem. We have a problem with fraud, with people making counterfeit of our product or something like that. Can we attack that problem?
Right.
Or we have this single logistics problem that we need to bring in all this data and bring it together.
Well, that's because you're only going to get an answer as good as the question you ask, right?
Correct.
So.
Yeah, and it's also really difficult to, I mean, this is the same, I've been a programmer for a long time, and there's this whole meme about coding being the new literacy, and a lot of people are like, I want to learn how to code. But there's all this stuff to learn, what should I learn? And what I tell them is like, well, there's no way to know what the right thing to do is. What you have to do is pick something that you want to do and do it start to finish. And what comes from that, what unfolds from that laser-like focus on a goal is just the things that you have to do.
Yeah.
And I think the same advice applies to companies, which is pick a problem that you actually need to solve, something that's actionable.
Yeah.
And from that, the entire strategy unfolds. And there isn't a way to just kind of shift the company into having a big data strategy. I do think that there is this structural problem in the market around the way that technology has historically been purchased. And you're seeing a little bit of it replicate itself in the big data space, which is that technology tends to be purchased through the CIO's office, through the IT department, right? And broadly speaking, these are groups within large organizations that are interested in buying capability, sort of broad capability, generic capability that could theoretically be applied to all different problems in the organization, which is why they're asking questions like, well, we need a big data strategy. But it turns out that I think big data problems they have to be tailored. And I'm not sure that strategy has actually worked in the past. And so, again, not only the place where we've seen people be successful is where they have a specific problem, but where actually the acquisition of the technology is driven by a business unit who owns the problem. Because it's not like an enterprise data warehouse is a great piece of software and it could be very useful for a lot of things. But if you just buy one and install it and it's sitting there, it's really hard to figure out how to apply it. So rather than generally buying big data capability, I think a focus on solving a specific problem and using that to generate what we should buy or build or whatever is the right way forward.
Yeah. So I'm curious to ask you specifically about Palantir, because it has this, I don't know if you've experienced this, but in my talking to other people, it has this reputation of being very secretive about what it says.
It does. It's funny. We've had discussions about this internally, and it's like there's 300 videos up on YouTube of our software.
Well, I was
in
going to
action.
say, you do a lot of blogging about Palantir's applications and some really fascinating stuff like disaster recovery and human rights violation tracking, and like, tell me, where do you think that reputation comes from?
It comes from two places. One is that the first set of customers that we did work with were doing work in national security, and we still work with some of those folks. By volume, it's actually a much smaller part of our business than it used to be, because we've been sort of working with a lot of different commercial customers. And so immediately, when you're working in that sphere, when you're doing anything that's the least bit spooky, people are happy to attach all different kinds of assumptions about what you do. The other thing is that we're a products company, like we sell software to folks, and the stories of our customers are not ours to tell. So even when we engage with the media, we don't have a big customer list that we can reference. Some of them would really rather not be referenced. And then there's just this idea that a meme gets perpetuated in the media. And I think some of the early stories about us included this notion of us being secretive. And in the early days, we were pretty stealthy about what we were working on. It turns out we didn't need to be that worried about someone replicating us, because what we're doing is really hard and very difficult to replicate. But we were a little secretive about what we were doing early on. But then we've always been very open about how the technology works.
Yeah.
But it doesn't have a simple story to it. So it's like it totally defies an elevator pitch, and it's not the kind of thing where you can just be like, oh well, it's like SQL but for monkeys. Like there's no simple way to. So and when people in the media try to understand, it's actually very difficult to understand.
Yeah.
And so I think what happened is, in a bunch of early stories, the thing that sells headlines is the relationship to national security and the kind of stuff that people are worried about, and it's difficult to understand. And so they're like, we'll call it secretive.
Right.
And then every subsequent story goes and looks at it and says, hey, these guys are called secretive. We'll just call them secretive. Whereas, if you go on our website, like, all of the documentation for the product is available. Like, there's example after example of different data sets being used, and I think we feel that we're actually very open about what it is we build and how it works. And if there's any way to brand us as secretive, it's just that, like, our customer stories are not ours to tell, right?
So is that part of what you've had to combat as an ambassador?
Absolutely.
Or, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of what I'm trying to do is sort of explain to the world what it is we do, because it is a hard story to understand, and to make it clear that it's the kind of place where people can come to really get access to and work on really big, hard, challenging, both technical problems and real problems out in the world. So like our disaster recovery work, like you mentioned, we have a philanthropic arm where we have a team of folks. They're part of the main company. It's not like a separate foundation or anything, where we go look for big, hard problems in the world. And sometimes they don't have budget behind them, but they need to be solved. And if we think our software can help, we donate our software and our time and our expertise to do the data part for these organizations and really make a difference. So, disaster recovery is a big one. Human trafficking is another one, where we work with Polaris and actually with Google Ideas on running the National Human Trafficking Resource Center hotline. We're looking at veteran affairs, and global health is a new big one that we're looking at. And we also have entered into a partnership with the Rockefeller Foundation to help run the 100 Resilient Cities initiative that they have. So, and those are great examples, because those are things that it's actually easy for us to talk about. And when we do things philanthropically, we can use them as fantastic examples. But for me, a lot of what I'm trying to get across to people is like, when we build the products themselves, a lot of it is taking the best of breed of open source stuff, changing it slightly if it needs to be changed, and then building the missing pieces. So you can go look this up on our website. We have something we call Horizon, which it looks a lot like Spark. Right. We shipped it in 2009, but we needed it as part of our stack. It wasn't a separate product or anything like that. Instead, it was a piece of what we needed to give the kind of interactive performance that you need, that an in-memory database will give you. Yeah. And obviously, other people can build it. Spark isn't even the only one out there. So we're happy to do the hard engineering piece when it needs to be done, and use the best of breed of things that are out there. So inside our stacks, you find things like Cassandra, you find Hadoop, you find Lucene. I think we're actually switching over to Elasticsearch. Yeah. So these are the kind of things that we're happy to use, and then we're happy to change it and add it out to. And then the user interface piece is where we add a lot of value. So a lot of my job is to say, look, there's really great and interesting work to be done here, and do it in a kind of a product-focused way. And then we have this whole team of folks who go out and work with the customer, because we have this kind of odd hybrid business model. We're a products company, but anytime you're dealing with problems of this nature, this level of complexity, especially in these organizations that have a very long-lived, fractured data topography, right? It's not as easy as like downloading a license key, installing some software, and then you're good to go. That integration actually takes a lot of work, and each problem is its own unique, messed up snowflake. Yeah. And so we have a whole team of software engineers that actually deploy into the field, which makes us look a little bit like a services company. But the interesting thing about how we structure those deals is we don't get paid for the services. Oh. So as a company, we're always trying to engineer ourselves into fewer and fewer services. And so like the metric that we're always concerned about is like, how many field engineers do we need per deployment? And if we can keep that number under one, it's fantastic, and we're getting actually pretty close to that. Sometimes when we move into like a new vertical and we're trying to figure out just exactly how to apply to this kind of data, there might be 20 people on site for like 3 months. Yeah. But they're actually prototyping new pieces of the product in the field, and then later that gets adopted into engineering. So we're really kind of an enigmatic organization. Part of it, I think part of the secret thing is we defy categorization. Right. And so it can be difficult. Like, well, this isn't. It's not apples and it's not oranges. It must be some secret fruit that no one's ever heard of. Well, I know you talked about before how like actually the limiting factor on a lot of this is the talent. That's the scarce resource, and so it sounds like Palantir is deploying that resource in strategic ways to make the most of it. And everything that we can do. I mean, and so part of it is we've been able to attract the talent and deploy that resource as much as possible, and then we try to do everything we can to engineer the talent into the product. And you're seeing some of that in the broader big data ecosphere, where a lot of the DevOps and sort of the deployment work that you would have to do is being taken care of by the Clouderas of the world. We're building these products that are sort of turnkey and ready to go. Our stacks are a little bit bigger and sort of have longer pipelines to them, as well as the user interface piece. And the user interface piece, that's the one that I'm actually really curious about. And I was looking at some of the sessions, and there's some people talking about it and some people working on it. It's heartening to see, because I think that's the last piece to really make this kind of analysis accessible to a broader audience. But I think it's, one thing that I like to think about is like, what kind of challenges do tech companies like to take on? And I think that tech companies tend to focus on what I like to call a very Western aesthetic of perfection or optimization. I like to pick on NVIDIA just because they're a great example, which is like, they build video cards, and like they're everything they do is about delivering more triangles faster, right? And like that's it. And like if they get more triangles faster, they've won. And everything that you do with those triangles, that's someone else's problem to turn into pretty pictures or whatever. Yeah. And so it's a really deep optimization problem. And I think you see that throughout the tech sphere in general, that it's much easier from a technical perspective to just say, we have this one piece and it's somebody else's problem to figure out what to do with it. We've decided to flip this on its head and make it a human problem, and really start from the question of, assume an analyst, or actually more importantly a team of analysts, what is everything that they need?
Right.
Right? What is everything they need? Not one thing, but all of it, right? And user interface is the piece that a lot of people, it's easy to drop on the floor, especially for technical folks, because it brings in that softer creative side, or the fuzzier side, where you need to, where it's not just about design, or work, measure, optimize, work, measure, optimize.
Right.
Instead, you have to take the time to figure out the human factors and the messiness around how people do their work.
Yeah, but those are the interesting stories to tell, right?
Very interesting, yeah.
So it makes your job good.
Yeah. Oh yeah, and we've just started building up. Well, we've spent the last 2 years building up a product design group. We spent a long time looking for the right product designer to lead that group, and we have a guy named Joshua Goldenberg who actually comes from the film industry and did a redesign of the Second Life interface, and has really thought about these sort of really deep interactive environments. And he's put together a fantastic team of about 20 product designers who are just thinking about what is the right interface to put on here. And one of the interesting things that's come out of this is, we started by building a very fully featured, very rich tool, and what we're seeing now is customers are actually asking for simpler tools.
Right.
So we build the kind of the Photoshop, and then people are like, actually what I want is Photoshop Express. I want just the 3 things that I need to do every day.
Yeah.
And the web, the move to the web, we started building sort of heavyweight desktop apps in Java because in 2006 that was the only way to do it.
Yeah.
And now the web, you can have an amazing rich experience. And so we're in the middle of re-implementing the whole world for the web.
Yeah.
And that's going to let us sort of do a nice mix and match of different pieces, different tools, and put them together into a single integrated application.
Yeah, I was just having a conversation actually with Hadley Wickham about how in data visualization, everything is moving to the web, everything ends up in JavaScript no matter what tool, but also there's this wonderful marriage of tools starting to happen. So it sounds like that's happening in more spheres than just visualization. But
yeah, and the other thing that the web is giving to us is to really think about there being 2 audiences for the output of analysis. And so the idea being that you're going to have a team of analysts, maybe data scientists, maybe not quite data scientists, who are going to spend their days doing analysis on the data, but what they're producing are actually analytic product. And that needs to be consumed by the rest of the organization.
Yep.
And by putting it on the web, it's just a URL.
Yeah.
Right? You don't want to put it in a PDF. And not only is it just a URL, but it can be an interactive experience.
Right.
Where the analytic product, you can have a larger population that's consuming the output of a smaller group of analysts, and the web makes that easy.
Yeah, and the interactive piece makes it personal, right? Because you can navigate your own path through it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, well, thank you so much for talking. It's been fascinating.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.